Hello and welcome to the third episode of Inner Defenses Season 2. Welcome, Shiv. How are you?
Good.
We had to call you from somewhere. I think you were out on an errand.
There's
London
a
office
lot of
today.
stuff going on in the army right now. The
Yes,
defense minister
yes.
is in Jammu, so there's been some briefings and stuff. So I've been attending those.
Right. So good you brought it up because I think
Yeah.
that's the topic we want to just jump into. I think when it comes to India's defense establishment, one of the most controversial and complicated state is Jammu and Kashmir.
Yeah.
Without any. So what's happened and why we are discussing is what's happened is there was a terror attack, an ambush in which 4 soldiers were killed. After that, 3 civilians were found dead.
Yeah.
No one formally has said what happened. No one has said how they were killed. There have been allegations that they were killed while in the custody of the Indian Army. The Indian Army has not denied those allegations, which is, I think, as important as admitting to something. But at the same time, has not really clarified on what happened, but saying, strict action will be taken, whatever way we're cooperating, etc. Rajnath Singh, like you said, is in Jammu and Kashmir. He's in Poonch, and he gave a big statement today, told Army to ensure such things don't happen in the future. But we still don't know what those such things are because, like I said, no one has on record said what has happened. We'll get to all of that. But first, I want to talk about, and I think I briefly mentioned this in our previous episode, that something's happening in Rajouri. So, Poonch-Rajouri, adjacent districts, this was, of my count, I think the third attack near Rajouri this year. One also happened in August last year. So if you want to count from August, these are 4 attacks. As somebody who's been to Jammu and Kashmir, as somebody who's covered this aspect of the defense so closely, infiltration from Pakistan, etc., terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir, can you, on the map of Jammu and Kashmir, explain why this place is so volatile as it has been for this year, especially, and what's exactly going on with respect to Pakistan?
Okay, so first of all, this year I complete 20 years as a defense correspondent, and I'm very proud to say that not a single year has passed in the last 20 years that I haven't visited Jammu and Kashmir at least once. So whether there have been years where I've visited like 5-6 times also. Those have been bad years. You remember a few years ago when the ceasefire violations were happening practically every day. I used to go like every few weeks practically. But Jammu and Kashmir is something unlike any other part of this country. And first of all, to any of our listeners who are thinking of visiting, you must visit. It's a great time to visit. The winter season in Jammu and Kashmir makes it one of the most beautiful places on earth. It's not called paradise on earth for no reason. But on much more serious matters, since we're talking about Poonch and Rajouri, I've visited that entire stretch, Dev, a number of times. Poonch, Rajouri, and Mender, which is just basically north of Jammu city.
Okay.
If you go along the line of control, that's where it is until you hit the Pir Panjal range. And the Pir Panjal mountains basically separate the Jammu region from the Kashmir Valley.
Right.
The Kashmir Valley begins north of the Pir Panjal mountains. So if you basically want to understand the map of Jammu and Kashmir, think of it as this large, very imposing mountain range called the Pir Panjal, kind of bisecting Jammu and Kashmir into 2 halves. One is Jammu in the south, and there's the Kashmir Valley in the north. Now, the reason why the Poonch-Rajouri area is a particular pain point is because if you look at the data of infiltrations, encounters, a number of terrorists arrested, all manner of criteria since the abrogation of Article 370, all of those figures are favorable figures. They're all down. They're all down. I have some data which we'll get into a little bit later, but just very broadly speaking, this particular region has become a bit of a flashpoint because A, it's very close to the line of control. B, it has always been known as a highway for infiltration. One of the reasons for that is south of the Pir Panjal, the terrain very close to the line of control is not as formidable as north of the Pir Panjal, where you encounter lots of very high terrain, high altitude areas, very steep approaches to the actual border crossing, the line of control crossing, etc. And therefore, infiltrations are far simpler. They're far easier, logistically speaking, in the south of the Pir Panjal areas. So that's one of the reasons why it has continued to happen. There are various reasons being ascribed as to why if infiltrations and terror violence in general has come down, why does it still happen over here? And like you rightly said, Dave, it's not only been happening, but each and every one of those incidents has resulted in a high casualty, end game.
Yes.
In May this year, 5 Indian Special Forces men were killed in action in one encounter. In November this year, just last month, you had 5 army men in a place not very far from where this month's incident took place, Thana Mandi,
Yes.
the same sector. 5 men lost their lives, and now you've got 4 men, who've been killed. So I'll come to the civilian deaths in a little bit, but this particular area has. It's almost like the terror violence in this area has never really stopped. It's never really stopped because it's logistically less challenging for the other side. There are villages that go very, very close to the line of control in the Poonch-Rajouri Mainder sector, as a result of which, and I'm not making a broad aspersion over here, but in terms of human help for those infiltrating across, it's a little bit simpler because those villages are very close to the actual line of control. The ability for handlers sitting across the line of control to keep a tab on what's happening on this side is a little simpler on this side, like I said again, because of logistics and terrain. And it has historically been one of the places where infiltration actually began.
Right.
Many people don't realize that the whole method and instrument of infiltration in order to fuel terror in Jammu and Kashmir began in these sectors. Way back in 2003, after about a decade and a half of militancy in Jammu and Kashmir, and we'll talk about this also in great detail, the Indian Army was compelled to mount an operation called Operation Sarp Vinash, destroy all snakes. The reason for this is because the army had basically come to the conclusion that no matter what it was doing in terms of small disparate encounters, the levels of violence in Rajouri-Poonch were simply not coming down. And one of the reasons for that is because, and people need to visit these areas to really understand what this means. It's one thing to describe it, it's another to see it. This is very, very rugged, high altitude, forested terrain, where the terrain offers like hundreds of hiding places. There are caves, natural alcoves where there are hiding places. There are these enormous structures, rock-like structures that allow people to stay inside out of the cold for a long time. So it's practically, I mean, if I don't want to say this in a disrespectful way, but it's terrain that's made for terrorists. Okay. It gives terrorists who manage to get into those areas a vantage point. It gives them a position of advantage because these are areas that are practically overlooking all the access routes which the army takes. And that's also, Dev, the reason why each and every one of these incidents that you've just described that have happened in Rajouri or Poonch have always been ambushes. Yes. Where the method appears to be, and this is, I don't know if this is applicable to all 3 of the incidents that we've talked about, but in at least 2 of them, there would be one encounter, a small encounter somewhere where a terrorist would fire a few rounds just to attract attention, to announce their presence. This is a tried and tested, modus operandi. Reinforcements are called by the army. They only have one access route for those reinforcements because the kind of terrain means they can't climb, etc. They can't use helicopters because it's dangerous. And effectively, some of these vehicles enter what is called a kill zone. And this is something we also described in our last episode, Dave, which is that these are no longer these terrorists that India is dealing with. They are no longer, they're not your stereotypical, jihadi style, kurta pajama wearing, guys who are just like leaking across the border. These people are trained very, very well. They carry pretty impressive equipment. Some of them have been found with Kevlar vests and things like that. They've got a lot of ammunition. They carry
like a military basically.
They've got commando style training. They carry high protein, low weight foods that are capable of keeping them in a good position to fight for long periods of time. And they are essentially prepared to die. So you're up against an enemy that who's already written off their death warrants. They're okay to die. Their only mission is to extend and delay that death as far as possible and to inflict as much damage
Damage is possible.
in that time. So you've in Rajouri and Poonch, I dare say, compared to any other part of Jammu and Kashmir, the odds are almost 100% stacked against you. And that's the reason why this is happening.
Right. So very good description, I think. And for people like me who've not been to Jammu and Kashmir for either tourism or for journalistic purposes, I think that's a very good description of what exactly is wrong. Because I have been racking my head about this and could not figure it out. Especially like you said that the data that you have, the number of incidents have gone down. Ceasefire violations have almost come to zero because of the reiteration of the ceasefire agreement that happened, I think, a couple of years ago, which has helped us immensely to face off with China, but that's a separate story altogether. Where are these guys coming from then? Because I'll tell you something. I've spoken to one of our colleagues. I would not like to name him, but somebody who is from Jammu and Kashmir and who currently is staying there as well while working with us. And I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him what's it like over there. He gave a very frank assessment that the local youth over there does not want to anything to do with the militancy anymore. Especially after 370. They are like, we don't want to deal with it. So whatever violence that is happening, the only people who are there are mostly pushed from Pakistan through the Pakistani army. One, as somebody who's been covering this, like you said, you just come from a briefing from somebody, I'm guessing the defense ministry. Can you confirm that if that's a fact? And second, then how are these guys still coming across?
Look, one of the over 20 years, one of the things I've learned with great anguish about Jammu and Kashmir is that every debate about Jammu and Kashmir boils down to how can you have an opinion? You don't live here.
Yes.
Or, what do you know? You only visit here twice a year. Or, you don't have any skin in the game. You cover it sitting in Delhi or Noida or whatever. So you can't really feel strongly about these things. Now, all of those things are, of course, true. Nobody can have any real skin in the game unless they're there. That's one of the reasons why, and a former boss of mine had told me, look, if you're going to be a defense journalist in India, you don't need to wish for going to conflict zones. You've got one of the world's most festering conflict zones 45 minutes from Delhi by air. Okay, so his singular advice to me was, go to Kashmir as many times as you possibly can, because each trip will bring you a new learning about it. And teach you something about your own country, teach you something about Pakistan, teach you something most definitely about the United States and China. And therefore, that's one thing that I've always done. Now, since every single argument in Jammu and Kashmir, they've usually boils down to either a very passionate kind of tu meme or a kind of blame game. Post the abrogation of Article 370, the only thing we can really the good thing about Jammu and Kashmir now is we've got some data. We've actually got data now which is verifiable, quantifiable, numerical arithmetic data, which anybody can verify for themselves, because these are figures that are shared with Parliament as well. I just want to share just a few of those things. Since you mentioned why youth don't want to be part of this militancy, etc. anymore. Stone pelting is down 92%. I'm talking about before,
compared to 2018 and
before abrogation and post abrogation. So basically post August 2019. Grenade attacks are down 15%. IED blasts remain the same, interestingly, but they've not gone up. Casualties in IED blasts are down 77%. Hit and run cases are down 42%, all Parliament figures. Weapon snatching incidents are down 60%. Hartal and Bandh calls are down 90%. Encounters are down 32%, which is huge for Jammu and Kashmir. Usually that figure is like 2% up, 3% down. 32% down is crazy. Civilians killed in terrorist violence is down 11%. Civilians killed during law and order duties is down 100%. So this is your humanitarian, torture and crimes against civilians, etc. is down 100%. Police casualties on duty is down 57%. Terrorist recruitment is down 17%. Terrorist arrests up 58%. And arson incidents are down 60%. So these are just like 15, 16 quantifiable criteria, which gives you a sense of how much things are actually down. And this is all post the abrogation of Article 370. Now, the thing about Jammu and Kashmir is, it's one of those states that's immune to public relations. You can't PR your way out of Jammu and Kashmir. You can't send some actors there and say, "Chalo, wahan jaake shooting karo," and everything's hunky dory over there. The only thing that becomes a barometer for peace and explains the question that you asked about why the youth of Jammu and Kashmir no longer want a part of it is because nothing sells peace like profit.
Yes.
It's an old saying, and nothing is truer than that. If you can assure a large section of a population in a conflict zone profit, they have zero incentive to support anything else. Their incentive for peace goes much, much higher. Now, no cinema halls are going to open in Srinagar unless the owners of those halls are assured of some kind of peace and some kind of profit. Why would all your restaurants and other recreational sort of services open in Srinagar and Gulmarg and Pahalgam and all these places if there was no assurance that terrorism and militancy was kind of being distanced and rejected and kind of othered by the local population? We have to remember that militancy in pockets of Jammu and Kashmir flourished because it was embraced, shielded, to a large part because the population was under threat, under pain of violence. They had to, provide logistics or protection to these militants and terrorists. Now that's no longer the case. Now, if tourism now, yes, okay, as journalists, we should be cynical, we should be skeptical, we should ask questions about, maybe data can be fudged, maybe painting a picture about J&K that's not really true. But if there is a fourfold increase in tourism in 1 year, in 2022, there was a fourfold increase in tourism. If you want to sit and say, oh, that's because after COVID, everybody wanted to travel or whatever you want, then you're just fooling yourself, because the one thing you cannot do is convince people to go to a dangerous place. You cannot do it, no matter what. You can send Miss World over there. You can send football stars who were recently there in Srinagar at Lal Chowk tossing the ball around. The one thing you can't do is send India's Aam Aadmi and Aam Mahila into the firing line. They will not go. Why will they do this? Arey, mera paisa hai. I want to go someplace and have a beer and chill. Yeah, that's my holiday money. Why will I go to Kashmir? So people need to ask, why are people going to Kashmir to holiday? Because it's a gorgeous place. It's literally better than Switzerland at a fraction of the price. There are cinema halls there. There are beautiful restaurants there. There's so much to do. There are adventure sports. You can go there and ski. So these things this is where the story tells itself. So that to coming back to your question, if young people in Kashmir are realizing that, hey, wait a minute, I'm not cloistered here in Kashmir. I'm not cloistered here in Srinagar. I can go and study in Delhi. I can go and study in Bangalore. I can go and study in Chennai. I can go study wherever I want. I've been fed this thing. I don't want to get into the whole Kashmir, the separatist thing. Forget about that for a moment. Okay, we're all Indians here. Kashmir is a part of India. People have also realized that leaders in Kashmir have spent their entire lives being hypocrites.
Yes.
Okay, whether it is the Gilanis or the people who live on the Gupkar road in Srinagar, they've feasted on the fruits of being an Indian passport holder or a citizenship card holder actually brings to you, while still waving the separatist flag or praising Pakistan or doing all those things. Syed Ali Shah Gilani is one of the most profound examples of what it means to be a true hypocrite.
Yes.
His children studied in Delhi. His children had passports. They benefited from all of the things that you get from being an Indian citizen. And yet, till his dying breath, he was a virulent separatist who believed that Kashmir belonged to Pakistan. So that phase is gone. The people who benefited from that era of Kashmir, where conflict was power. Yeats, the famous Irish poet, said something which is true for every place in the world, Dave, which is conflict is power. The end of the conflict means the end of power for these people. The people who profit from there being uncertainty, there being a large army deployment, there being this constant aura of fear and threat and dread in the Kashmir Valley. if all of that goes away and you have sunlight and daisies and houseboats and restaurants and people enjoying themselves, where's their power? It disappears, which is why your Mehbooba Muftis are whining all the time, saying, oh, Article 370. Others are, doing their own thing, and, they have got nothing nice to say about quantifiable improvements in Jammu and Kashmir. So I'm not surprised at all if the young people of Kashmir have realized that, look, this is ridiculous. This is not a moral war that we have been on the side of. This has been something that Pakistan has done to bleed India, and Kashmir has been caught in the middle. At no point of time has Kashmir been anything else but part of the Union of India. It's as simple as that.
In fact, some of the words that our colleague uses for these politicians, if I can't actually say them on air.
Yeah. I know the words though. Yeah.
I know that's the kind of anger they have for the politicians over there. I mean, I don't want to generalize it. Obviously, he's just one person in a large crowd, but because he's the one reference I have, so that's why I brought him up. So it's quite a rosy picture you've painted, but there is a blot on it, something that we are seeing this week, and we'll get to that after a quick break.
Sometimes I find that what gets in the way of me fully believing in an affirmation is a lot of self-doubt, a lot of, poor self-esteem. I think that's like a huge roadblock. You start thinking, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough. Even if I say this 10 times a day, how will I achieve this? I don't have it in me. And I think some of that keys into your childhood or your formative experiences. You've written a book on, good habits for kids. Are there certain things parents or caregivers should say or do that can help bring about this self-confidence to children?
I love that you're using this example, and it's so important and vital. Also, it's really funny. So the book is for kids to read and understand habits, right? And I've had parents write to me saying that while reading the book, I've learned how to talk to my child. So I found that very cute, because that was also one of the objectives. So there are multiple things that we can do. Okay. The first one is, obviously you are not perfect. Obviously you will have, all of us have self-doubt, right? Self-confidence is low. You don't believe that you can do certain things. But there's a key word if you attach to that particular affirmation or thought that can completely change the way that you perceive it. And that word is simply yet, Y-E-T, right? I don't have the confidence yet. I don't have the skill to talk to 1,000 people yet. I don't have the ability to go and ask my boss for a pay rise yet. As soon as you add that word yet, it gives you that sense of, yes, it is achievable. And yes, I'm on the right path to it. Very often our low self-confidence comes from this playback loop that happens in our mind, where we constantly say that, oh, I'm not good enough. Add the yet, and you will see that now you're looking into the future to acquire those skills. So that is the first thing. Another very nice rule that parents can use is never use the word should or must. Should, must, are words that we use when we want to guilt people into something. And guilting kids into getting things done works, which is why parents use it. But it is something that creates an inadequacy in a child.
Welcome back. Shiv and I are discussing and talking about the situation in Jammu and Kashmir with reference to and context of the recent terror attack in Poonch, where 4 army soldiers were killed, and events that have happened after that. So like I said at the beginning of this episode, we don't know formally on record what has happened. I'm pretty sure you have a fair idea, knowing your sources in the establishment. There have been allegations, there have been videos that have gone viral on social media. Surprisingly, the videos have not been taken down, which was quite the shocker for me. Lots of questions for me, Shiv. I'll begin with the one which I think is the most problematic and I can't figure it out. The video was, first of all, we don't know if it's true or not.
Yeah.
But it's all been taken off, because it's very easy to tell social media, Twitter, X or whatever, that this is harming our national security. You have to take this down, and they don't really have a records to do that. The video, if it is authentic, was obviously shot by somebody from within the army, and somehow it managed to be leaked. Second, the army has not formally said anything about what happened with the civilian deaths. At the same time, has not denied the allegations that they were killed while in army custody. before we can talk about this, I think it's best if you can just tell us what you know and what has actually
Okay, so
happened.
the very fact that the army has already put out a statement saying that it will cooperate in full and that nobody will be spared already suggests that what is visible in those videos, or at least what has been claimed to have been the case, which is the deaths of these three civilians in custody, is basically true. Let's go with the supposition that it's true, because nobody has denied it.
Yes.
The fact that nobody has denied it is very important, especially in J&K,
Yes.
Dave, because if something is untrue, it is vehemently and very forcibly and passionately denied right at the outset, because these things can be very damaging, as we have seen. Now, I'll explain to you what I know of what has happened, and I'll also try and give our viewers a little bit of context, because these are extremely disturbing pictures.
Yes.
Like you said, they are the worst kinds of things that one would expect to see in an area like that. The reason they've probably not been taken down is because the army or the government probably realizes that that's a fool's errand. It's pointless trying to remove something like that on social media. Two reasons for that. It's the Streisand effect, right? You try to delete something from the internet, and you're calling even more attention to it. And B, Pakistan and Pakistanis and Kashmiri IT cells, as they were, are probably waiting for that kind of thing, because that would be an indicator of guilt in their view, and it would basically kind of be a trap. So not wanting those pictures deleted is perhaps the prudent thing to do. In this case, I'm frankly quite surprised, because usually our government agencies are very ham-handed about these things, especially when it comes to information warfare. So I have to say I'm frankly quite impressed that someone had the sense to say, we need to deal this. We deal with this in the moral and the correct way. You know, face it head on, say the right thing, and not look like we've got something to hide. Because there's no two ways of saying that what happened was a terrible thing. What has happened is a crime. The very fact that neither the army nor the government has said investigations are still on into who these men were, etc. They've just said we will cooperate, which means that those deaths were custodial deaths, most definitely. If you add the layer of those horrifying videos, which you rightly said, nobody's taken ownership for those videos. Where did they come from? Who filmed them? Must have been someone in the army. How did they leak, etc., etc. Then it becomes even more horrifying, because which means that somebody wanted these pictures to be seen and was part of the custodial torture, if that is indeed what was happening. Now, the sense that I get from all of these things which don't confirm what happened is that three men were definitely picked up. They were among maybe 8 or 9 men who were apparently rounded up from these border areas near LOC villages near Rajouri-Poonch. They were interrogated. My information is that the survivors from the ambush may have indicated that some of these men may have been seen as part of the ambush, etc. We don't know for sure, but that's one of the things doing the rounds. And therefore, these 3 men were taken. Passions were already high, because remember that of the 4 men who were killed, there have been reports to suggest that 2 of them were beheaded and mutilated in other ways as well. We don't have proof of that. In fact, when I did a show last week where I mentioned this, the army was very upset with me. They said, "Why are you mentioning it? We don't know all this. The families will be upset." And I apologized to them. I said we were only asking questions about it, but now it's everywhere. It's been reported widely that beheadings have taken place, and an army unit, especially in a disturbed area. These are wired very differently from your regular army units. In these units, your life is literally in the hands of the next guy. You live the kind of duty where the next minute could be your last. It's very difficult to explain. It's difficult for me to digest that as well. But I've spent time at LOC units, and over there, you're literally, think of it as going through your most mundane tasks at death's door, where the next moment something could fly in and hit you in your bunker, in the safety of your bunker, and that could be your last. So you're already very highly strung. The amount of faith and trust you put into your fellow soldiers and troops and officers is of a magnitude that is many, many times higher than otherwise, because there you don't have a choice. I have to put my life in your hands if I am to function and be able to sleep normally. If I can't put my life in your hands, I'm going to be a mental wreck. So that putting your life in another man's hands is like a way of life at the line of control. Now, if you put all of these pieces together, you basically have a situation where when any of those people you're so wired and so completely close to dies in this horrific manner and they are beheaded, and beheading is beheading has very symbolic and cultural connotations in both India and Pakistan, and it's done for a reason. It's done to send out a message of fear and domination and things like that, and to humiliate a unit. And when that happens, it's almost like a taunt. It's a violent taunt. When that happens, it sends the men into a frenzy of anger. Okay, we're talking about professional soldiers here. I'm not saying these are mad guys who just lost their cool and did this. I'm just saying that these are human beings pushed to the very edge of their mental and physical, tolerances. And what happened was a terribly unprofessional act where they rounded up these people, did not use traditions of the army, did not use protocols, and they tortured these men. Okay, we'll know the details of what happened once the investigation comes out. But from what is apparent, it looks like these three men were tortured for very flimsy with very flimsy evidence. And then they were killed in custody. Yes. Let's make no bones about it, because to the army's credit, they've made no bones about it. They've said they're willing to cooperate. An FIR has been lodged. The brigadier has been attached, and he's been shunted, and he's been being investigated. I understand that action could go up a little higher as well. Okay. 3 more officers have been also acted again for disciplinary proceedings. So the army doesn't fool around. Okay, when people say that the army will do a cover-up, the army cannot do a cover-up. There are too many safeguards and layers within the army for a cover-up to ever happen for something like this. People have to understand that when you're in an army, it's not like it's one person's Raj and everybody else has to fall in line. These are units that have a huge amount of oversight. A company has a battalion looking over it. A battalion has a brigade looking over it. A brigade has a division looking over it. A division has a command looking over it. A command has a theater looking over it. A theater has the army headquarters looking over it. The army headquarters has the Ministry of Defense looking over it. So you've got these amazing concentric circles of accountability being fixed right down to that man on the ground. So nobody can do whatever they want and get away with it in the armed forces. There have been allegations in the past of human rights abuses and stuff. Even human rights abuses, which is one of those criteria I just read out here, are down dramatically. And one of the reasons for that is because the army has not only realized, but has seen the benefits of having to operate in Kashmir, in Jammu and Kashmir, in a way that it has been described by a former chief as iron fist with a velvet glove, which means you have to win the hearts and minds of the people. This is not a place where you just go with your guns and expect everyone to love you and be your friend. It's not going to happen. Yeah. You have to remind them that you are their army. You're not an invading force. You're not a foreign force. These are your people. These are Indian citizens. First, stop looking at them as Kashmiris. Stop looking at them as people from Poonch. These are all Nagarik Indians. So, that line has to be completely blurred, which is why this incident is terribly damaging. It's very, very damaging. And I'm frankly actually quite surprised that it hasn't become an even bigger story. I did it on my show for 3 days continuously. The fact is that the army, I think, has realized that, trying to prevaricate or obfuscate or, delay or try and blur what's going on would have been damaging. So to their credit, they've decided, let's just take this head on. We'll face the consequences. But they see the big picture. Yeah. The big picture is one little incident of this kind can damage everything. All the good work that's been done for years together in Jammu and Kashmir, including the abrogation of Article 370, all of that can simply disappear now. Yeah. All of that can just go down.
Yeah. It's a good point. And I actually wanted to talk about that, the last bit that you just spoke about have you also noticed, because I definitely have, and this has been a topic of discussion on our news floor, that there is a visible shift in the government's and the army's positions on allegations against the setup. And I'm not going to link it to any particular party in power. I'm just going to link it to the Indian government.
Yeah.
I have an example. In 2020, there was a fake encounter in Ashimpura. A major, if I'm not wrong, or a captain was court-martialed. The court-martial found him guilty and recommended life in prison for him. It's going. It's he's filed an appeal against it. Like it's his legal right. So that's a case in progress. But I think this was one of the rare instances where the army held a court-martial and found a officer guilty of a fake encounter. You had the infamous episode of, I think he was a major, if I'm not wrong, or captain, Leetul Gogoi. He had tied a band to a bonnet of the Jeep.
And then you saw what happened to him later.
Exactly. I was going to come to that. Initially, there was no action against him because I'm guessing in the heat of the moment, the army did not want to act against him. But then he was caught with a woman at a hotel. And then I think General Bipin Rawat, who was the army chief back then, said, we'll take very harsh action against him. There was also the case of in June of a major apparently being acted against for forcing people to chant Jai Shri Ram slogans outside a mosque in, I don't have the location.
I think it was Baramulla.
Baramulla, yes, exactly. And even though it was not widely reported, but I think there were reports that the commanding officer had gone to the area and personally apologized to the villagers over there to ensure that it did not blow up into a larger issue. The only instance I can think of where the army hasn't visibly acted is the 2021 Nagaland killings, because in that case, I'm guessing the army is going with, see, it was an accident, but it was part of our job. So AFSPA's there to protect us. That was not intentional.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at, there have been instances, there have been allegations of wrongdoings against the army, and there have been some actions taken. I would perhaps want more in terms of visibility. Like in this particular case, I'd rather the army come out and say, yes, we did pick up those men. Yes, they did die in custody. We'll cooperate with the probe and we'll find out what happened. But let's keep that point separate for now. Do you also see the shift? And do you think it kind of it goes with the idea that you said about winning people's hearts over there, and that's the ultimate way to solve the whole problem of militancy in the first place?
You know, in many talks and discussions, the army, says one thing which Pakistan usually scoffs at. But I find it to be a very powerful phrase that the army uses when it talks about itself, where they say that the Indian army is not just a powerful army, but also a moral army. And we have morality on our side. The Indian army says we have morality on our side. Incidents of this kind damage that morality. But if you look at the overall picture of why there has been this shift that you mentioned, Dev, in terms of both A, accountability, B, not just accountability. The intention has to be to bring down those incidents, and that's actually visible. It's on the ground. We have to remember that the reason why these incidents have also come down is two-pronged. A, it's because the army realizes that we can't have that kind of method of doing things alongside the larger intention to win the hearts and the minds of the people. Those two things simply cannot go hand in hand. It has to be done. This is the long road. None of these things are going to be achieved overnight. Number two, technology has changed the game. Technology has completely shown that, whether it is social media or mobile phone cameras. Look at this incident of custodial deaths. There was a video out. Who would have thought that a video would come out of that when it was the army, apparently involved. Social media, the ability for, pictures and images to have sort of chain reaction effects larger than the actual incident itself is also a very compelling reason not to do those things. That's an extraneous reason. The real reason, of course, is that each of these, every time something like this happens, it's going to damage you. Now, you mentioned Leetul Gogoi. That was an extremely important. The reason why it was such an important incident is because you saw two sides of how the army can treat, the manner in which an officer behaves. In the first, controversial, he tied a man to his jeep. The guy was, driving through that area, and stones didn't get pelted. It polarized the entire country because those images went so viral. And yet, Leetul Gogoi was rewarded for it. He was praised. He was made a hero because the army took a call saying, in a difficult situation like Kashmir, sometimes it is only the man on the ground who can take that call.
Take that call.
Only the man on the ground who can take that call. The man who was tied to the jeep did not die.
Hmm.
Nobody else got injured. None of the people on those buildings threw stones, and everyone went home that night. He said if he had not
Perhaps
taken
things
a
would have
call
been
to do
different.
that,
Yes.
who knows? Maybe there would have been injuries. Maybe stones would have been pelted. Maybe the troops would have been provoked enough to fire
Open
back.
fire. Yeah.
And there you would have had a terrible situation. So as controversial and polarizing as his action was, he took a difficult, controversial decision on the ground, being that man on the ground and who had skin in the game at that point. So I think what the army did was fine. But later, like you said, there was a woman, there was some questionable behavior. She was at his hotel, she was somebody else. All that scurrilous stuff. And then the army put its foot down and says, we don't care what your
Yes.
past actions are. You may be a hero on social media. People have been printing T-shirts with your picture of that guy tied on his jeep, and distributing them. But you are only as good as your last actions.
Yes.
And therefore, that action was taken. So the army realizes that what was that famous terrorist's name? The guy who was killed in 2016. Anyway,
Burhan Wani.
Burhan Wani.
Yes.
When Burhan, thank you. So when Burhan Wani, I can't believe I've forgotten his name because I covered his funeral as
Yeah.
well. So when Burhan Wani, the reason why I bring up Burhan Wani is that you saw the huge
Yes.
crowd that came out for his funeral, right? Burhan Wani is a terrorist who actually taught the army many lessons about the dangers of an image of social media,
Wow.
and how social media can be a monster for you.
Right.
So the second point that I was making as a compelling reason why these humanitarian incidents have come down is because of that. Because there are hyper alert social media cells of these terror groups waiting for the army to screw up, waiting for the army, to show some kind of aggression against a civilian, waiting for that small piece of video footage, God forbid, of an army soldier slapping a child or dragging a woman or hitting somebody else, just waiting for that thing because they know that one little image has the capacity to inflame a region.
Yes.
It can inflame it, and it happened with after Burhan Wani. The army was very quick to send down word after that whatever we do, we've got to be wary of the new paradigm of the internet that we live in right now. Okay, this is not just fun and games hunting terrorists in the hinterland anymore. We are fighting in different dimensions, and just imagine that for a moment, Dev. You're a soldier, okay? Your job is to go into a really, really difficult, dangerous place to hunt terrorists. But at the back of your mind, you're also thinking about, if you get this wrong, then they're going to have images of us getting this wrong.
Yes.
And our next operation is going to be 100 times more difficult.
Yes.
So you're thinking not just tactically, you're thinking strategically, you're thinking about social media, you're thinking about the effects of all of these. And these are professional soldiers and officers, the best in the world, operating in the most difficult part of the world, having to do these things. And if these people, with the burden of morality, that's the other thing. The terrorists don't have the burden of morality. Pakistan army doesn't have the burden of morality. These are people who are coming in fully prepared to die anyway. With the burden of morality, with the awareness and the knowledge that these things can go terribly wrong and affect us in a later operation, if they are able to bring down the number of torture incidents or crimes against civilians, then it's hats off to them.
Yeah.
This is the army achieving exactly what it wants to.
Yeah. Right. Last thought from you, and this is the big golden question. Where do you see the Jammu Kashmir situation going in the near future? From your 2 decades of reporting experience on matters of defense, from your biannual trips to Jammu Kashmir, from the fact that Pakistan is, like we discussed last time as well, financially starved for money right now, has the FATF breathing down its neck, because of which it has to visibly show some sort of action against terrorism.
Yeah.
The ceasefire is more or less, like we discussed earlier as well, more or less holding up. The youth have for the large part, lost their interest in militancy. Profit has returned to Jammu and Kashmir, so people are kind of prospering and seeing why this is good. Yet you have incidents like Rajouri happening, incidents in Rajouri happening, in Poonch happening, something like what happened this week happening, which will fester for a while, the image at least. Where do you see all of this going? And the larger question, do you, like me, also think that perhaps army is the wrong unit to be deployed in Jammu and Kashmir? Because what you were talking about, I'll just make it very simple for our listeners and viewers. The army is trained to kill.
Yeah.
Their job is to literally wage a war and die for your nation if they have to, right? They are wired differently.
Yeah.
Forget people in Jammu and Kashmir. Their basic training is just different. They're not like you and me who'll have questions of morality when they're fighting, or when they're faced with something that they see or perceive as violent, or something that can end their life. So at some point, I'm not talking about AFSPA, right? I'm not talking about AFSPA, but at some point, do you think it's just wise? And I think in mostly it has happened, by the way. Army, I think, if people follow news very closely, most encounters actually involve now the Jammu and Kashmir Police, SOG, the Special Operations Group, if I'm not wrong, or the CRPF. The army is deployed, but yes, it is still there. So at some point, do you think the army should be removed? Because I personally think it is the wrong unit to be deployed.
So even the army agrees with that.
Oh, really?
So even the army believes that it, and they obviously nobody will say that formally or openly, but like you said, the army is a military arm, right? So they're not there to sit around. They're there to defend and kill, right? It's the hammer. It's the hammer blow. The army is the ultimate hammer blow. If you speak, candidly with army officers, generals, veterans, what have you, they will agree 100% what you've just said. That it's not the army that should be deployed in Jammu and Kashmir. They most certainly should be the unit at the borders, at the line of control, most certainly. Even at our international borders, the army says the border security force is there. You don't need the army. You have restive borders like the China border, the line of control, line of actual control, eastern sector. There you have the army. The army usually is supposed to be a little behind. What is ideal and what is ultimately something that is imposed and becomes a prerogative for the government are two entirely different things, especially in India's case. Now you asked me where this is going. So to answer your last question first, absolutely, the army shouldn't be there. Most certainly not in such large numbers. But we also have to acknowledge, Dev, that attempts have been made to draw down the army. There's been a plan for, I think, at least the last post-Kargil. Next year is 25 years since Kargil. Yes. Even in the Kargil committee report by K. Subramaniam, there are, the genesis of that thought process of dwindling down army presence in Kashmir was there. It took birth there. Of course, there have been stops and starts, but ultimately, winding down or reducing the army's presence in Kashmir can't be based on it can't be based on idealism. It has to be based on requirements on the ground. Yes. If you've got the army doing a job where there can be no gap whatsoever, then it's difficult to rotate the army out and put a new force in. Those things are General Bipin Rawat sadly is no longer with us, but one of his chief projects was to bring down the army numbers in Jammu and Kashmir by half.
Okay.
He said I want to see in my tenure bringing army levels down by half. And I used to tell him, how are you going to do that in your tenure? Then, of course, he became the chief of defense staff and things like that. So, who knows? But he said, because that's the only way. That's the only way to, make this move forward. Because when you ask me, where do you see things going now? The only way I'd want things to go forward is normalcy. In my mind, which is in some ways informed also not just by the realism of what's happening, but also a little bit of idealism. Because I believe that if we constantly harp on the fault lines that have kind of bled this issue, it's never going to be solved. Because people will take their rigid positions and that'll be the end of it. I would rather Kashmir see so much normalcy, Dev, so much tourism, so much profit, so many universities and hotels, and it become another beautiful Switzerland-like place where people from all over the world come and visit, where where the profit, the profit and the normalcy becomes such a profoundly exponential incentive for everyone
Yes.
across levels, that militancy and terrorism become side issues. They blur out. People stop talking about separatism, and those things are completely, they put 6 feet into the ground. They don't exist, because if a person is going to threaten your profit, you're going to do everything you can.
Yes.
You'll deploy your mother to kill them,
Yes.
right? So that I believe that's the solution. Normalcy is the solution to conflict. It can't any longer be about, oh, let's sit across a table and talk with Pakistan, or let all these great elders of Kashmir who've done nothing for Kashmir, frankly, sit across the table with the Indian government and decide what is the best, or the Hurriyat, or whatever it is, Mirwais, and all these other crooks, right? These guys are irrelevant now. It is the people of Jammu and Kashmir who stand to gain, who stand to profit from normalcy, who stand to become wealthy, prosperous people. For the economy of Jammu and Kashmir to prosper, for companies to invest there, for software companies to say, hey, why can't we have a great, big, huge office over there? How about a brand new economic zone in Srinagar or Badgam or wherever, high-rise buildings and all that kind of thing. I mean, just make a money economy in Jammu and Kashmir, because that's the only thing that will, sort of stop the cycle of violence and conflict in its tracks. The reason why it's all of this, of course, is easier said than done, is because the normalcy we're seeing now is one tiny baby step. The reason for that, of course, is abrogation of Article 370. Pakistan is collapsing, but that's not good news, because an unstable Pakistan,
you never know what will happen with that.
You like it or not, is not good news for India, because it means that the volatility in that country could manifest itself in even more attempts to destabilize India at the line of control. Attacks like 26/11, which is to draw attention to Pakistan's power once again. All of these things can still happen. So destabilized Pakistan is not good news for us. But that's not our concern. Our concern is still, making sure Pakistan does not have the potency to do, one of those things. Like 26/11 was a very low investment, high rate of return, terrorist attack that Pakistan had mounted. They should never be allowed to do that again, because there's too much at stake now. There's too much normalcy in Kashmir relative to how it was before Article 370 for us to gamble it away, by not being alert, by allowing incidents of the kind that happened in Rajouri to happen. And I think that's where it is. It's just small baby steps going forward.
Yeah, and I think what you're getting at, and I completely agree with you, I think terrorism and militancy ultimately have to boil down to the level of being a law and order issue, at which point then the police can handle it, and it's not a defense issue, so that the army 100%. Can be focused on doing what it should be doing, which is protecting our borders, whether it's with China or Pakistan. Thanks, Shiv. I really wanted to discuss this issue with you. So, I mean, this topic, Jammu and Kashmir, at some point. I did not
You haven't been to Kashmir, have
I
you?
haven't been to
Okay,
Jammu and
so
Kashmir.
now you should.
I really will. So thanks for your insights. Like I said, controversial, complicated topic, but I think you broke it down very well for us. So thanks a lot. And thanks as always to our lovely producer Anna Priyadarshini, and to our listeners and viewers. Drop a comment to us. Let us know what you think of our discussions. This is the third episode of a new season of Inner Defense. Doing this with Shiv Aroor now. You can WhatsApp us at 8588 That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries with the passport. Bye bye.